She was the ghost in his hallway, the signature on his contracts, the silent figure at the end of his dining table. For 5 years, Clara was the perfect duchess, unseen, unheard, and utterly alone. Her husband, the Duke of Ashbury, believed he had all the time in the world to ignore her. He thought duty was a wall that would never crumble. He was wrong. What happens when the woman who would do anything for you decides she's finally done? This is the story of a love that didn't begin at the altar, but at the very moment the marriage ended. The ink on the marriage certificate was barely dry when Arthur St. John, the 9th Duke of Ashbury, left the room. He didn't look back. He didn't offer a reassuring squeeze of the hand or a soft word to the trembling young woman who had just pledged her life to him. He simply checked his pocket watch, nodded to the bishop, and walked out into the biting November wind of 1884. To Arthur, Clara Montague was not a bride. She was a solution, specifically a solution to the crippling gambling debts left behind by his late father, and a way to merge the Montague shipping fortune with the ancient, albeit crumbling, Ashbury prestige. Clara, only 19, stood in the center of the cavernous drawing-room of Ashbury Hall, her fingers clutching the lace of her dress so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was not a classic beauty by the standards of London society. She did not possess the sharp wit of the debutantes or the sultry allure of the widows who frequented the velvet parlors of Mayfair. She was quiet, she was observant, and she was terrifyingly in love with the man who had just walked away from her. "Your Grace," the butler. Mr. Henderson said softly, breaking the silence. "Shall I have your things moved to the Teal Suite?" "The Teal Suite," Clara asked, her voice small. "Is that near the Duke's chambers?" Henderson hesitated, his eyes darting away. "It is in the West Wing, Your Grace. The Duke resides in the East Wing." A quarter of a mile apart. That was the distance of their marriage on the very first night. The first year passed in a blur of agonizing routine. Arthur was a man possessed by his work in the House of Lords and his estates. When he was home, he was polite but distant, treating Clara with the courtesy one might afford a visiting cousin one didn't particularly like. They dined together, separated by 10 feet of mahogany and an arrangement of white lilies that blocked her view of his eyes. "The roast is adequate," he would say. "I shall convey your compliments to Chef Rousseau," she would reply. That was the extent of their intimacy. But the silence wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the rumors. They drifted up from London like smog. Rumors of Arthur's carriage being spotted outside the townhouse of Lady Isabel Vane. Isabel was everything Clara was not: fiery, outspoken, and dangerous. She was a widow with a scandalous reputation and a laugh that could shatter glass. One rainy Tuesday in March, Clara found herself in the library, looking for a distraction. She found Arthur there, pacing a glass of brandy in his hand. He jumped when he saw her hastily covering a letter on his desk. "I didn't hear you enter." He snapped, his tone sharper than usual. "I apologize, Arthur. I was looking for the new volume of poetry by Tennyson." "Tennyson," he scoffed, turning toward the window. "Sentimental drivel. You should occupy your mind with more practical matters, Clara. Perhaps the household accounts Henderson tells me the coal usage is exorbitant." Clara felt the sting of tears, but swallowed them down. She was a Montague. She would not cry over coal. "I have already audited the accounts, Arthur. We are under budget. I just wanted to speak with you." He turned his handsome face, etched with impatience. "About our anniversary." It is tomorrow." Arthur stared at her genuinely blank. The date meant nothing to him. It was just another day on the calendar. "Is it? Very well. I shall have my secretary arrange a gift. Was there anything else?" Clara looked at him, really looked at him, at the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the brandy glass into the fireplace. "I am your wife," she wanted to yell. "I am the one who ensures your shirts are pressed, who manages your tenants, who defends your name when the whispers about Lady Isabel get too loud." Instead, she curated her silence. "No, Arthur. That will be all." She left the room, and for the first time she didn't just feel sadness. She felt a cold, hard stone forming in her chest. It was the beginning of indifference, though neither of them knew it yet. If the first year was the year of silence, the third year was the year of humiliation. It was the height of the London season, 1887. The Queen's Jubilee was approaching, and the capital was buzzing with energy. Arthur had insisted they attend the premiere of a new opera at Covent Garden. It was a rare public appearance for them as a couple, and Clara had allowed herself a flicker of hope. She had commissioned a new gown, a deep emerald silk that brought out the green in her hazel eyes. She had her maid Sarah weave pearls into her hair. When she descended the stairs of their London townhouse, Arthur checked his pocket watch. "We are late," was all he said. No compliment, no glance. The Royal Opera House was stiflingly hot and glittering with diamonds. As they entered, their box heads turned. The Duke and Duchess of Ashbury were a curiosity, the Ice Duke and his ghost bride. Clara sat stiffly, her fan moving rhythmically, trying to ignore the opera glasses trained on her. During the intermission, the box door opened. It was Lord Henry Fitzroy, a distant cousin of Arthur's and a captain in the Royal Navy. Henry was tanned from service in the colonies, with a smile that reached his eyes, a stark contrast to Arthur's perpetually furrowed brow. "Arthur, and the lovely Duchess?" Henry bowed, kissing Clara's gloved hand, a fraction longer than necessary. "Cousin Clara, you look like a spring garden in the midst of winter." Arthur barely looked up from his program. "Henry, when did you return?" "Yesterday. I hear you're giving a speech on the corn laws tomorrow." "Riveting stuff, I'm sure." Henry winked at Clara, who felt a flush rise to her cheeks. It was the first time a man had looked at her with genuine interest in years. "It is important legislation," Arthur muttered. "And surely, Arthur Bow," Henry pressed, "you must be bringing Clara to the Somerset ball on Friday. I'm dying to claim a waltz." Arthur waved a hand dismissively. "Clara does not enjoy dancing. She prefers early nights. Besides, I have a committee meeting." Clara's hand froze on her fan. She loved dancing. She had told Arthur this on their wedding night. He had simply forgotten. Or worse, he didn't care to remember. "Actually," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly but distinct, "I should like to go to the ball." Arthur's head snapped up. He looked at her with genuine confusion, as if the furniture had suddenly spoken. "Don't be absurd, Clara. You'll be exhausted." "I am 22, Arthur, not 80. I am capable of a waltz." Before Arthur could retort, a hush fell over the theatre. The door to the box directly opposite theirs had opened. A woman stepped out, resplendent in scarlet velvet diamonds dripping from her neck like raindrops. Lady Isabel Vane. She scanned the crowd, her eyes locking instantly on the Ashbury box. She smiled a slow, predatory curve of the lips and raised her fan in a direct salute to Arthur. The entire theatre saw it. The whispers started instantly, a hiss of gossip that was louder than the orchestra tuning up. "Did you see?" She waved at the Duke, right in front of the Duchess. How bold, how cruel. Clara looked at Arthur. She expected him to look away to show some sign of embarrassment for his wife's sake. Instead, Arthur nodded. A short, curt nod of acknowledgement to his mistress across the void. It was a small gesture, but it broke Clara's world. Henry Fitzroy saw it too. His jaw tightened, and he looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't quite place. Pity, anger. "Arthur!" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "We must leave." "The second act is about to start," Arthur said, oblivious to the devastation he had just caused. "Sit down, Clara." "I said." Clara stood up, the emerald silk rustling like a storm. "We must leave. Now, or I shall leave alone." Arthur looked at her, annoyed by the scene. "You are being hysterical." "And you," Clara said, her voice suddenly devoid of all emotion, "are being watched." She turned and walked out of the box. She didn't wait for him. She didn't wait for the carriage. She walked out into the cool London night, hailing a public hansom cab. As she sat in the dark, smelling the leather and horsehair, she realized something profound. She wasn't sad anymore. The stone in her chest had cracked, but what came out wasn't grief. It was rage. When she arrived back at the townhouse, she went straight to her room. She instructed Sarah to pack her trunks, not for a trip, but for a relocation. She moved her belongings out of the suite adjoining Arthur's and into the guest wing on the floor above. When Arthur returned 2 hours later, furious and ready to lecture her on proper conduct, he found the door to her old room open and empty. The vases were gone. The scent of her lavender perfume had faded. He marched upstairs and pounded on the guest room door. "Clara, open this door. We need to discuss your behavior tonight." The door remained shut. "Clara." From the other side, silence. Arthur stood there, his hand raised to knock again, but something stopped him. For the first time in 3 years, he felt a flicker of unease. He was used to her tears. He was used to her quiet pleading. He was not used to a locked door. He turned on his heel and stormed off, telling himself she would be back to normal by breakfast. She always was. She was Clara, after all. Dutiful, boring, reliable Clara. He didn't know that the Clara he knew had died in that opera box, killed by a nod to a woman in a scarlet dress. The morning after the opera, the sun rose over London with a deceptive brightness, casting long beams of light across the breakfast table of the Ashbury townhouse. To the casual observer, the scene appeared domestic and tranquil. The silver gleamed, the tea steamed, and the newspaper rustled. But to Henderson, the butler, the air in the room was suffocating. Arthur sat at the head of the table, snapping his copy of the Times. He was waiting. He was waiting for the apology. In his mind, the events of the previous evening had been a hysterical overreaction on Clara's part, a public scene that threatened his dignity. He expected her to walk in eyes red from weeping, murmuring contrition for locking her door. He would then graciously accept her apology, perhaps offer a lecture on the stoicism required of a duchess, and order would be restored. The door opened. Clara walked in. Her eyes were not red. They were clear, dry, and terrifyingly calm. She was dressed in a walking gown of slate grey, her hair pinned back severely. She did not look at him. "Good morning, Henderson," she said, her voice light. "I shall take toast and black tea today." No kippers. Arthur lowered the paper. Clara. She paused while pouring milk into her tea, not spilling a drop. Yes, Arthur. I trust you have rested, and perhaps reflected on your display last night. Clara took a sip of tea. I slept remarkably well, thank you. The guest wing is surprisingly quiet. The street noise is far less intrusive on that side of the house. Arthur frowned. This was not the script. You are moving back to your chambers today. The servants will talk. Let them, Clara said simply. She buttered her toast with precise, deliberate movements. They talk anyway, usually about which florist Lady Isabel favors this season. I imagine a change of topic will be refreshing for them. Arthur choked on his coffee. He set the cup down hard, the china rattling. How dare you speak that name in this house? Why not? Clara looked up, her gaze steady. You acknowledge her in front of half of London. Surely I can acknowledge her over breakfast. I nodded Clara. It was a polite gesture to an acquaintance. An acquaintance? Clara repeated, tasting the word like sour wine. Is that what we are calling her? Very well. Regardless, Arthur, I am not moving back. In fact, I have a busy day. I am going to the park. The park. You have the household accounts to review. The invitation list for the autumn hunt needs to be finalized. Clara wiped her mouth with her napkin, stood up, and smoothed her skirts. I'm sure you will manage, Arthur. You are a duke after all. Men of your station are capable of running empires. Surely a dinner party list is within your grasp. She walked out. Arthur sat there stunned. For 5 years, Clara had been the invisible engine of his life. She managed his correspondence, remembered his mother's birthday, vetted the staff, and ensured his favorite Prada was always decanted. He didn't realize the extent of her labor until 3 days later. It started with small things. His favorite riding boots were not polished. When he barked at his valet, the man stammered, Her Grace usually reminds us to send them to the cobbler on Tuesdays. Your Grace, she did not mention it this week. Then the correspondence. Arthur arrived at a committee meeting for the Board of Trade, only to find the doors locked. A confused clerk informed him, My lord, the meeting was rescheduled to Thursday. Notices were sent out last week. Arthur checked his desk when he returned home. The notice was there, buried under a pile of unopened letters. Clara always sorted his mail. She always placed the important invitations on top, with the dates circled in red ink. Now the pile was just a chaotic heap of paper. He stormed into the drawing room, where Clara was calmly reading a novel, a French one, he noted with irritation. Why was I not informed of the Board of Trade rescheduling? He demanded. Clara didn't mark her page. I saw the letter, Arthur. It was on your desk. You usually tell me. I used to do many things, Arthur. I found them unappreciated. So I stopped. She turned a page. If you want a secretary, I suggest you hire Mr./Mrs. Pringle. I believe he's looking for work. If you want a wife, you might have to look elsewhere. You seem to have one in reserve in Cheapside. Arthur felt a vain throb in his temple. This was insubordination. It was mutiny. And the worst part was he couldn't discipline her. She was doing nothing wrong. She was simply doing nothing. We are attending the Somerset ball on Friday, Arthur declared, trying to regain control. I expect you to be ready at 8, and I expect you to wear the Ashbury diamonds. We need to show a united front. Clara looked at him, then a strange, unreadable circle playing on her lips. Oh, I shall be there, Arthur. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The Somerset Ball was the apex of the social season. The ballroom of Somerset House was a sea of pastel silks, black tailcoats, and the glitter of family heirlooms. The air smelled of beeswax, expensive perfume, and champagne. Arthur stood near the entrance, checking his pocket watch. It was 8:15. She was late. He was already composing the lecture he would deliver in the carriage. Punctuality is the politeness of princes, Clara. Then the room went quiet. It wasn't a sudden silence, but a ripple that started at the top of the grand staircase and washed down to the floor. Arthur looked up. Clara was descending the stairs. She was not wearing the modest, high-necked gowns. She usually favored the ones that made her blend into the wallpaper. She was wearing gold. The dress was a daring creation of shimmering satin that clung to her figure, cut low across the shoulders in the fashionable continental style. It caught the light of the chandeliers so that she looked like she was made of liquid fire. She was not wearing the heavy, old-fashioned Ashbury diamonds. Around her neck was a simple, thin, black velvet ribbon with a single massive pearl drop. It was modern. It was striking. It was sexy. Arthur's mouth went dry. He had been married to this woman for 3 years, and he had never realized she had a figure. He had never noticed the curve of her neck. She reached the bottom of the stairs, and immediately a swarm of black coats surrounded her. "Duchess, may I have the first waltz? Your Grace, you look positively radiant." "Clara, darling, where have you been hiding?" Arthur stepped forward, an instinctive surge of possessiveness rising in his chest. He pushed through the crowd. "My wife," he announced, his voice tight, offering his arm. "Clara, you are late." Clara looked at his arm, then up at his face. Her expression was pleasant, polite, and completely distant. "Traffic, Arthur. You know how the Strand gets." She took his arm, not for support, but as a formality. Her touch was light, impersonal. As they walked into the ballroom, Arthur noticed the stares. Men were looking at her with hunger. Women were looking at her with envy. He should have felt proud. Instead, he felt a gnawing anxiety. "You are not wearing the family diamonds," he hissed under his breath. "They are heavy, Arthur, and old. I felt like something new. And that dress, it is rather bold." "Is it?" She smiled at a passing earl. "Lady Isabel wears red velvet cut down to her navel, and you seem to find that acceptable. I thought I was being quite modest by comparison." Arthur ground his teeth. Every conversation led back to Isabel. He wanted to shake her. He wanted to drag her home and lock the doors. "Dance with me," he commanded. "The waltz is starting." "I'm afraid I'm engaged," Clara said smoothly. "Engaged to whom I am your husband. And he," Clara pointed with her fan, "is the man who asked me 3 days ago." Captain Henry Fitzroy materialized from the crowd, looking dashing in his dress uniform, the gold braid gleaming under the lights. He bowed low to Clara, ignoring Arthur entirely. "Your Grace, you saved me a dance." "As promised, Captain," Clara said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming warmer, richer. A tone she never used with Arthur. Henry swept her onto the floor. Arthur stood alone on the edge of the dance floor, watching. He watched his wife, his quiet, mouse-like wife, throw her head back and laugh at something Henry said. He watched Henry's hand rest firmly on her waist, perhaps an inch higher than propriety dictated. But Clara didn't pull away. She leaned into the turn. They moved in perfect synchronization, a golden swirl in a sea of grey. "She is lovely, isn't she?" Arthur stiffened. Lady Isabel Vane had appeared beside him. She was wearing purple tonight, and for the first time in his life, Arthur found the color garish. Her perfume, usually intoxicating, smelled cloying, compared to the fresh, clean scent of Clara's lavender soap. "Isabel," Arthur said, his eyes not leaving Clara. "Not now." Isabel followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing. She sensed a shift in the wind. The mouse had grown claws. "The little Duchess is trying very hard, isn't she? That dress. A bit desperate, don't you think?" "She looks magnificent," Arthur said. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Isabel recoiled as if slapped. "Excuse me." "She looks magnificent," Arthur repeated, turning to look at his mistress. He saw the heavy makeup settling in the lines around Isabel's eyes. He saw the hardness in her mouth. "And she is my wife." "You didn't seem to care about that last week," Isabel snapped, her voice rising. "Last week was a mistake," Arthur muttered. The music ended. Arthur saw Henry lead Clara off the floor, but instead of returning her to her husband, Henry led her toward the terrace doors, the balcony, the dark, secluded balcony. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Arthur's chest. He abandoned Isabel mid-sentence and strode across the room. He wasn't thinking about scandal. He wasn't thinking about duty. He was thinking that another man was taking his wife into the dark, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if she would come back. He burst onto the terrace. The air was cool. Clara was leaning against the stone balustrade, fanning herself. Henry was standing close, too close. He was whispering something, and Clara was smiling a soft, secret smile. "Clara," Arthur barked. They jumped apart. Henry turned, his expression shifting from amusement to guarded hostility. "Arthur, enjoying the evening?" "I am ready to leave," Arthur said, reaching for Clara's arm. "The carriage is waiting." Clara didn't move. She looked at his hand, then at his face. "It is only 10 o'clock, Arthur. I am having fun." "I said we are leaving." "You can leave," Clara said comfortably. "Captain Fitzroy has kindly offered to escort me home when the last waltz is finished." "That is out of the question," Arthur shouted. "It is improper. Improper." Clara laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You want to talk about propriety, Arthur? Out here, where anyone could hear us?" She stepped closer to him, her golden dress rustling. "You left me alone for 3 years. You left me to rot in that house while you played the great statesman and the bachelor about town. You do not get to decide when I leave the party anymore." She turned to Henry. "Captain, I believe I am thirsty. Would you fetch me some punch?" "At once, Your Grace," Henry said, shooting Arthur a look of triumph before slipping back inside. Arthur and Clara were alone. The silence stretched heavy and electric. "Clara," Arthur said, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and something that felt dangerously like fear. "What are you doing? Are you trying to make a fool of me?" "No, Arthur," Clara whispered, looking out at the London skyline. "I am trying to see if I exist. Because for a long time you made me feel like I didn't. I am your husband," he pleaded, reaching for her hand again. "That must mean something." Clara looked at his hand, then pulled hers away. "It means you own my dowry, Arthur. It means you own the house I live in. But it does not mean you own Moot. Not anymore." She walked past him back into the light, and the music leaving him standing in the shadows of the terrace, realizing with a sickening jolt that the ghost in his hallway had finally come to life, and she was walking away from him. The following week was a comedy of errors, though Arthur found nothing funny about it. He had decided with the grim determination of a general planning a siege that he would woo his wife. He assumed it would be simple. He was, after all, rich, titled, and reasonably handsome. Surely a few trinkets and a kind word would reset the clock. He was wrong. On Tuesday, he visited the most exclusive jeweler on Bond Street. He selected a diamond bracelet, heavy and cold, set in platinum. He left it on her vanity table before dinner. When Clara came down to dine, her wrists were bare. "Did you not find the gift?" Arthur asked as the soup was served. "I did," Clara replied, cutting a piece of bread. "It is very expensive. I have instructed Sarah to put it in the safe. It will be a fine inheritance for your future nieces." "It was for you to wear," Arthur said, irritated. "I have jewelry, Arthur. I do not need payment for dining with you." On Wednesday, Arthur tried a different tactic. He remembered that women liked flowers. He ordered the florist to fill the house with white lilies, massive, fragrant arrangements that covered every surface in the drawing room. He waited for her to come home from her afternoon walk. When she entered, she stopped dead. She didn't smile. She wrinkled her nose. "Is someone dead?" she asked. Arthur stepped forward, a hopeful smile plastered on his face. "No, I thought they were romantic. They were the flowers you carried at our wedding." Clara looked at the wall of white blossoms. "Yes, I carried them because your mother insisted. I detest lilies, Arthur. The smell gives me a migraine." Arthur froze. You hate them." "I love yellow roses," she said softly, walking past him to open a window. "My father used to grow them. I have mentioned this, perhaps 6 or 7 times in the last 3 years. Arthur looked at the lilies, which now looked like mocking white ghosts. "I didn't know," he murmured. "No," Clara said, turning to face him, her expression not angry but pitying. "You didn't know because you never listened. You were too busy listening to the whispers of London society to hear the woman sitting across from you." But the final blow came on Thursday. Arthur had cleared his schedule. He had cancelled a hunt, a committee meeting, and even a briefing with the Prime Minister. He intended to take Clara for a drive in Hyde Park, to show her off, to be seen as the attentive husband. He waited in the foyer at 2 o'clock. At 2:05, the door opened, and Clara walked in. But she wasn't alone. Captain Henry Fitzroy was with her. They were both laughing, cheeks flushed from the wind. Henry was holding a small brown paper bag. "Arthur," Henry said intrally too cheerfully, "we didn't expect to see you at this hour. Usually you are saving the Empire." I was waiting for Clara," Arthur said, feeling foolish in his riding coat. "I thought we might go for a drive." Clara untied her bonnet. "Oh, Arthur, you should have told me. Henry and I have just returned from the National Gallery, and then we stopped to feed the ducks." "Feed the ducks?" Arthur repeated. It sounded absurd. "You are a duchess." "She is a woman who enjoys simple pleasures." Henry cut in his voice, possessing a protective edge that made Arthur's blood boil. "And she has a terrifying aim with a breaded crust." Clara laughed again, that free musical sound that Arthur was beginning to crave like a drug. "Henry is exaggerating. But Arthur, I cannot go out again. I have promised to help Henry with his correspondence. His eyesight is straining from the flickering gaslight in his bachelor quarters." "I have a secretary who can do that," Arthur snapped. "But I enjoy it," Clara said. "Henry tells me stories about his travels in India while we write. Did you know he once rode an elephant?" "I don't care about the elephant," Arthur shouted, his composure snapping. The servants in the hall froze. Clara looked at him, her smile fading. "There is no need to shout. We will be in the library. Please do not disturb us." She took Henry's arm and led him away. Arthur was left standing in his own hallway, surrounded by the scent of the lilies she hated, realizing that the rival wasn't just stealing his wife's heart. He was stealing her time, her laughter, and her memories. Arthur retreated to his study and poured a drink. He sat in the dark, staring at the portrait of his father. "How do I fix this?" he whispered to the empty room. "How do I make her love me when she has learned to survive without me?" He didn't get an answer. Instead, he got a telegram that changed everything. It arrived at midnight. A frantic pounding on the door. Henderson brought the telegram to the study on a silver tray, his face pale. "Typhoid outbreak in village. Doctor overwhelmed. Tenants rioting over water supply. Request immediate aid. Steward." Arthur stared at the paper. Typhoid. It was a dirty, brutal disease. And the riots, his tenants, were peaceful people. Things must have disintegrated completely. He stood up, the fog of self-pity clearing instantly. He was still the Duke. This was his duty. "Henderson, pack my trunk. I leave for Derbyshire at first light. And tell the stablemaster to prep the fastest carriage." "Make that 2 trunks," a voice said from the doorway. Arthur turned. Clara stood there, wrapped in a dressing gown, holding a candle. She had evidently heard the commotion. "Clara, no," Arthur said firmly. "It is typhoid. It is dangerous. You are staying here." "Those are my people too, Arthur," she said, walking into the room. "And unlike you, I know them. I know that Mrs. Higgins needs willow bark for her fever, and I know that the miller will only listen to reason if you ask about his grandchildren first." "You cannot go," Arthur insisted, stepping closer. "If you fell ill, if I lost you." He stopped. The words hung in the air. Clara looked at him, her eyes softening just a fraction. "You lost me a long time ago, Arthur. Do not pretend to care about my safety now. I am going. I have already instructed Sarah to pack the medical supplies I keep for the charities." She turned and left. Arthur realized he couldn't stop her. Not anymore. The journey to Derbyshire took 2 grueling days. The carriage was a confined space of tension. Arthur tried to make conversation, but Clara was focused reviewing notes in a ledger she had brought. "What is that?" Arthur asked after hours of silence. "A list of the families," Clara said without looking up. "I write to the vicar's wife every month. She keeps me informed." "You write to the vicar's wife?" Arthur was astounded. He barely read the steward's monthly reports. "Someone had to," Clara said. When they arrived at Ashbury Hall, the scene was chaotic. Smoke rose from a burning barn in the distance. A crowd of angry men had gathered at the iron gates, shouting at the terrified steward. Arthur stepped out of the carriage, ready to use his command voice to order them to disperse. But before he could speak, Clara stepped down. She didn't cower. She didn't wait for Arthur's arm. She walked straight toward the angry mob, her traveling cloak billowing in the wind. "Mr. Miller," she called out, her voice clear and authoritative. "Put down that pitchfork. You look ridiculous." The crowd fell silent. The burly man at the front blinked. "Your Grace, the Duchess." "Yes, it is me," Clara said, walking right up to the gate. "And I see you, Thomas, and you, Mrs. Gable. I heard about your daughter's cough last winter. Did the syrup I sent help? The tension in the crowd evaporated. These weren't faceless peasants to her. They were people. We are thirsty." "Your Grace," Mr. Miller said, his voice trembling. "The well is poisoned." "Then we shall open the private reserves from the estate cellars," Clara announced. "Arthur, give the key to the steward." She turned to her husband. Arthur stood there, stunned. She had quelled a riot in 30 seconds, with nothing but memory and kindness. He handed the keys to the steward, feeling like a junior officer in the presence of a general. The next 3 days were a blur of horror and exhaustion. Ashbury Hall was converted into a makeshift hospital. Clara was everywhere. She was in the cottages, sponging fevered brows. She was in the kitchens, directing the boiling of water. She slept for maybe 3 hours a night. Arthur did his best. He carried water. He organized the repair of the well. But he saw the way the people looked at him with suspicion and fear, and he saw the way they looked at Clara with adoration. On the 4th night, the crisis broke. The fever was receding. Arthur walked into the main house covered in mud, his bones aching. He went to the teal suite, Clara's old room, looking for a clean towel. The room was dusty, unused since she had left for London. He opened a drawer in the writing desk, looking for a cloth. Instead, he found a stack of letters. They were tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Clara's, and they were all addressed to him, to Arthur, to my husband, to the Duke. Curiosity warred with guilt. Curiosity won. Arthur sat on the dusty bed and opened the first one. It was dated November 1884, 2 weeks after their wedding. My dearest Arthur, I waited for you tonight. I wore the blue dress you said you liked. I wanted to tell you that I found a book on architecture I think you would enjoy. The house is so big and the silence is so loud. I hope you are sleeping well. I miss you, even though you are only down the hall. Arthur's hand trembled. He opened another. Dated 1886. Arthur, I saw you looking at Lady Isabel today in the park. You looked at her with such fire. I wonder if I dyed my hair red or if I laughed louder. Would you look at me that way? I'm trying so hard to be the duchess you need. But I am fading, Arthur. I feel like I am becoming part of the furniture. And the last one, dated the night of the opera just before she locked her door. I am done waiting. I realized tonight that you do not see me. You see a contract. You see a duty. You do not see Clara. Ooh, I loved you, Arthur. I loved you since I was 16 and saw you at the garden party. But I cannot love a wall any longer. Goodbye, my love. Arthur dropped the letter. A sound tore from his throat, a jagged, broken sob. He had thought she was cold. He had thought she was boring. He had thought she was content with their arrangement. She had been dying of loneliness, and he had held the knife. He didn't hear the door open. He didn't hear the soft footsteps. Arthur. He looked up. Clara stood in the doorway. She looked exhausted, her face smudged with soot, her hair falling out of its pins. To Arthur, she looked like an angel of judgment. He held up the letter. Tears streamed down his face unashamed. I didn't know. He choked out, his voice raw. Clara. I swear to God, I didn't know. Clara looked at the letters, then at him. Her expression didn't change. She walked over and gently took the paper from his hand. I know you didn't, Arthur, she said quietly. That is why it was a tragedy. Can we? Arthur reached for her hand, falling to his knees before her. Can we start again, please? Let me be the man these letters deserved. Clara looked down at him. Her hand was warm but limp in his grasp. The woman who wrote those letters is gone, Arthur, she said, her voice sad but firm. You killed her. I am what is left, and I am not sure if I have enough heart left to give you another chance." She pulled her hand away. "Get some sleep, Arthur. We have more sick tenants to tend to in the morning." She left him kneeling in the dust of her old life, clutching a ghost of a love he had destroyed with his own indifference. The typhoid fever broke with the arrival of the spring rains, washing away the grime and despair that had clung to the estate for weeks. By early May, the stark, grey landscape of Derbyshire had transformed. The moors, once threatening and bleak, were now softened by the purple haze of returning heather, and the air smelled of wet earth and new life. The smoke from the burning barns was a distant memory, replaced by the industrious sounds of rebuilding. Inside Ashbury Hall, the atmosphere had shifted too. The suffocating silence of the past 3 years was gone. In its place was a quiet, tentative peace, the sound of 2 people learning to breathe the same air again. Arthur was a man transformed. The change wasn't merely cosmetic, though he was thinner and his skin was tanned from days spent riding the boundaries of his land. It was a fundamental shift in his spirit. The staff whispered about it in the kitchens. The Duke no longer retreated to his study with a bottle of brandy to mourn his own existence. Instead, he was present. He had sold his prized thoroughbred racehorses' animals that had been the envy of the county to finance a state-of-the-art water filtration system for the tenant village. He ate breakfast with Clara every morning, not behind a newspaper, but facing her. He asked about her plans for the garden, about the vicar's wife, about the books she was reading. He listened, truly listened, absorbing her words as if they were vital to his survival. Yet he maintained a respectful distance. He never touched her. He never spoke of love. He respected the boundary she had drawn in the dust of her old room. He was a penitent, serving a sentence, waiting for a verdict he feared was already written. That verdict arrived on a Tuesday, carried in a carriage emblazoned with the royal crest. Captain Henry Fitzroy had come to claim his prize. He strode into the drawing room, bringing with him the frenetic energy of London. He shook the road dust from his coat, looking every inch the conquering hero, his smile bright and expectant. He had spent the last month charming the courts, while Arthur and Clara had been knee-deep in mud and sickness. "Clara!" Henry exclaimed, ignoring Arthur completely as he moved to embrace her. "I heard the news. Dreadful business. Simply dreadful. You must be exhausted, my dear. But I have come to take you back to civilization. Lady Jersey is holding her garden party next week, and the season is dull as dishwater without you." Clara stood by the tall windows, bathed in the pale spring light. She looked different than the woman who had danced in the gold dress. She was thinner, her face sharper, but her eyes possessed a clarity that hadn't been there before. She did not step into Henry's embrace. Instead, she offered him a cool, polite hand. "It is good to see you, Henry," she said softly, "but I am not sure I am ready for garden parties. Real life has been rather demanding lately." "Nonsense." Henry laughed, a sound that suddenly seemed too loud, too frivolous for a room that had witnessed so much recent pain. "You are the diamond of the season, Clara. You cannot hide away in this gloom with him." He cast a disparaging, triumphant look at Arthur. Arthur stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. A month ago, he might have challenged Henry to a duel for such an insult. Today, he simply walked to his desk and picked up a thick, cream-colored envelope. "Captain Fitzroy is right about one thing, Clara," Arthur said, his voice steady and devoid of bitterness. "You should not be hidden away." He walked over to her, his movements slow and deliberate, and held out the envelope. His hand trembled just once. "What is this?" Clara asked, hesitating to take it. "Freedom," Arthur answered. It is a deed of separation. I have had my solicitors draw it up over the last week. It grants you the London townhouse, fully staffed and paid for. It restores your entire dowry to your own accounts. And it grants you a permanent, generous allowance from the Ashbury estate. The room went deadly silent. Henry looked stunned, his mouth slightly ajar. Clara looked from the papers to Arthur's face, searching for the catch. "You are divorcing me," she whispered. "I cannot divorce you without a scandal that would ruin your reputation," Arthur said, softly, his eyes locking onto hers with intense vulnerability. "But I can set you free. You can live where you like. You can travel to the continent. You can be with whomever you choose." He glanced briefly, painfully at Henry. "I trapped you in this house for 5 years, Clara. I forced you to be a ghost in my hallways. I will not hold you prisoner now that you have finally come alive." Henry stepped forward, a wide grin breaking across his face. The game was won. "Arthur, I must say this is surprisingly decent of you. Clara, do you hear? You are free. We can go back to London immediately. We can travel to Italy for the autumn. Think of the opera, the art, the life we can have." Clara looked at Henry. She saw the genuine excitement in his eyes, but she also saw the shallowness of it. He saw her as a playmate, a beautiful accessory to dance with, to laugh with, to show off in the salons of Rome. He offered her an escape from reality. Then she looked at Arthur. He was pale. His jaw was set tight, as if he were physically bracing himself for the blow of losing her. He looked like a man tearing his own heart out of his chest, because he believed it was the only way to save her. She remembered the last week. She remembered Arthur holding the hand of a dying tenant, wiping a fevered brow without flinching. She remembered him sitting with her late into the night, learning the estate accounts, treating her not as a subordinate, but as an equal partner. She remembered the yellow roses he had clumsily planted in the garden himself, crooked and awkwardly spaced, because he finally remembered they were her favorite. "You are sending me away?" Clara asked Arthur, her voice thick with emotion. "I am letting you go," Arthur corrected gently, "because I love you, and for the first time in my life I love you enough to want your happiness more than my own comfort." Clara looked down at the papers. The ink was black, sharp, and final. It was a ticket to a life of ease. She turned to Henry. "Henry, your offer of Italy sounds enchanting. Truly." Henry beamed, reaching for her arm. Arthur closed his eyes, accepting his fate. "But," Clara continued, stepping back from Henry, "I am afraid I have too much work to do here. The tenants are still recovering. The school roof needs repairing before winter. And I have just started teaching the Duke how to tell the difference between a weed and a rosebush." Henry's smile faltered, confusion clouding his features. "Clara, surely you aren't choosing him after everything he did, after the neglect." "I am not choosing the man he was." "Henry," Clara said, her voice ringing with quiet steel, "I am choosing the man he has become, the man who sold his horses to fix a well, the man who learned to listen when it mattered most." She turned to Arthur, who had opened his eyes and was staring at her as if she were a sunrise he had never expected to see again. With a decisive tear, Clara ripped the separation papers in half. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "I do not want the townhouse, Arthur," she said, letting the pieces fall to the floor. "I want my husband. If he is willing to actually be a husband this time." Henry looked between them, realizing he had lost a game he didn't even understand. He bowed stiffly, his charm evaporating. "I see. I shall take my leave then. Good luck to you both." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving them alone in the vast drawing room. Arthur didn't move. He looked terrified, to hope afraid that if he breathed, the moment would shatter. "Clara, are you sure I am a difficult man? I am proud. I am stubborn. I have scars." "Yes," Clara said, stepping closer to him, crossing the physical distance he had maintained for weeks. "You are. But you are also here. You are present." She reached out and took his hand. It was rougher now, calloused from the labor of the last week, but it was warm. "I burned the letters, Arthur," she whispered, looking up into his grey eyes. "The letters, the ones in the drawer, the ones from the sad girl who cried in the teal suite. She doesn't exist anymore. We are starting from today, from this moment." Arthur looked at her, and finally the reserve of the Ice Duke broke completely. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck, holding her tightly, as if she were the only solid thing in a spinning world. He didn't promise her diamonds. He didn't promise her the moon. He promised her something far more difficult. "I will see you, Clara," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Every day. Until the day I die, I will never look past you again." Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. Outside, the sun was breaking through the clouds over Derbyshire, illuminating the yellow roses that were just beginning to bloom against the ancient stone walls of Ashbury Hall. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a marriage. And for the first time, it was real. And so the silence of Ashbury Hall was finally broken, not by shouting, but by the quiet, steady work of forgiveness. Clara and Arthur proved that love isn't just a dizzying feeling you fall into. It's a decision you make day after difficult day. He had to lose her to find her, and she had to be willing to walk away to find her own worth. In the end, they didn't fix their old marriage. They built an entirely new one from the ashes of their past. What do you think? Could you have forgiven Arthur after 5 years of cold neglect? Or should Clara have taken the ticket to freedom and Italy with Henry? It's a hard choice. Love is rarely simple, and forgiveness is the hardest act of all. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share these stories with more people. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a tale of romance, betrayal, and redemption. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Clara's shoes? I'll be reading your answers. Until next time.